Hello and welcome to today's Aurelia 2 deep dive video on dynamic composition. So what exactly is dynamic composition? Well, in a nutshell, it allows you to render components or views dynamically at runtime. So after the Aurelia application has already spun up and done its initial rendering, you can do dynamic rendering of components and views after the fact. So instead of having everything hard-coded in your templates and components that you have there when the app is spun up, AU Compose allows you to decide what to render based on application state, user input, configuration, or anything else that might change while your app is running. So why is this useful? Well, let's think about some of the scenarios like this. Say you have a dashboard where users can add, remove, or rearrange different widgets. Each widget could be a dynamically composed widget because every user might have different widgets and different configurations and whatnot. Plugin systems where loading components that weren't even known when you built the main application need to be displayed. Complex conditional UI, so instead of massive if-else blocks, which is messy and hard to maintain in your templates, you can dynamically compose the correct view. Wizards or step-by-step flows, so easily swapping out content on each step or even parts of the step or the whole step. That's where dynamic composition could be handy. Reusable layouts, so you could define a layout structure and dynamically inject different content pieces into it. Now it's worth pointing out in that scenario, you could use slots. You could also do router layouts as well, but dynamic composition also has a place in that instance. So basically, anytime you need to render something you don't know exactly what until runtime, AU Compose is likely your friend. Not for all instances, but for many instances, it can be very handy. So we're going to start with a very basic common use case here, and that's composing a known custom element, but doing it dynamically. So we're going to imagine that you have a custom element defined, maybe an input field, and instead of directly using my input, you can use AU Compose. So inside of our my app.html, which is our main view, we're going to just create some HTML here, composing a dynamic field, AU compose component.bind equals my field, AU compose. Now, we don't have anything that corresponds to this stuff yet, so we're going to go into our view model and we're going to define my field on the class. This isn't an instance, but it's the actual definition of the custom element. So we're going to use the custom element implementation from the Aurelia package and call the define. Oops, that's the wrong one. It's uppercase C, uppercase E. Of course, the lowercase variant there is the decorator for the class. So define name, this is the tag name that the element would usually have. We're just going to put my input here. And then the template is just going to be something simple like input type equals text. And then placeholder equals I am dynamically composed. So we're binding the component property of the AU Compose element to our my field definition. Aurelia takes this definition, it renders the component. In this case, it's my input, which is the tag name. But in this instance, the tag name isn't strictly necessary, it's just required. And then it wires everything up. So if we go into the browser now, we should see we have our rendered element here. And you can see it's rendering as my input with our input element and our placeholder. So that's a nice, easy, little quick example of rendering a basic component. You don't have to define them like this either. You could have this registered in the global dependency injection container and then render it that way as well, or you could import it and supply it as well. There's a few different ways. So it's worth noting here, and this is mentioned in the documentation, when you compose a full custom element like this, all its standard lifecycle hooks like binding, bound, attaching, attached, detaching, unbinding will be called just if you'd use the element directly in the template. Plus, there's an extra activate hook, but we'll talk about that soon. So now we're going to talk about composing with a string component name. So you don't always have to define the component inline. Say you may have a component globally registered in your dependency injection container like this, then you may just want to be able to reference it by its tag name. So we can use a string to do this. So we're going to actually create a new component to illustrate this. So I'm going to put a new label here, composing, if I can spell it right, by name. But before we do this, we're going to import our component, which does not exist yet, but it will. So my fancy input. Okay. AU compose, component. Notice we're not using .bind this time. We're just passing in a string directly to the attribute save. So it's complained because that does not exist, that input. So now we're actually going to create that particular input. We're going to create a view model first. We've already satisfied the bundler, and we'll just put in I am a registered component. Now we're going to create the HTML, my fancy input.html. And we're just going to create a basic div here, where we display the message using interpolation, of course. So we have our div now, and we'll add some just simplistic styling here. PX solid blue, and then 5 pixels of padding. So here Aurelia looks up the component name to my fancy input, which is of course the tag name. And because we imported it, Aurelia is going to find the definition in the dependency injection container, and it's going to render it. If you hadn't imported it and it wasn't registered globally, then you get an error. So if we go into the browser now, that did not work. So in that instance, we will make this bindable property and then import that. There we go. We forgot the bindable definition on there to get that to trigger. And now we have our my fancy import, and we have a div with our styling and our default text on there. So we can show that you can pass in a definition, you can pass in a string to a component, but now we're going to show you that you can compose using a template only approach. So you don't even need a definition in this instance. So I'm going to go into my app, and we're going to change this to composing by string. We're going to get rid of this input because we don't need that anymore. And then what we're going to do is we're going to get rid of component on this instance, and we're going to write template instead. So we're just going to put a simple paragraph element inside here with some style. So we'll say color green. Hello directly from a template string. So you can see here, we're not passing in anything fancy. There's nothing defined here. And if we go into here, you can see that it has rendered our paragraph element here with our color green on there. So Aurelia's template compiler processes that string and renders the HTML. It's nice and simple. But what if you wanted to change what the surrounding tag is on our composed element? So at the moment, you can see that it's just surrounding it in these tags, these comments here of A and A start, etc. Well, that's where the tag property comes in. So you can actually go tag equals div, and that will change the wrapper element around your dynamically composed content, maybe for styling or layout. You can pass in any valid tag in here. So we're going to put tag on there. We're going to get rid of the P. We're going to change this to a span tag instead, just to show that it is different. And we're going to change this content to this content is wrapped in our div. We are also going to add some styling to this as well, just to show you that it is different. So we're going to do a 2-pixel border that's red with 10 pixels of padding. So you can see that we've got our newly composed view here. And interestingly, you can now see that our value is wrapped in a div with the style on there. So it's taken this tag here and it's changed it to a div. So instead of comments, our composed span is now wrapped inside of a div. You can also add a class in there as well if you wanted a class on that. And any bindings you put in AU compose like class or style will get transferred to the host element. So I can show you that if we put a class on here and go div wrapper and save that, we inspect this, you can see it's going to transfer the class onto that host div. Nice and simple. So another example to illustrate that we're not just bluffing is we can go h1 tag just to really show this is different. So it's not wrapped in a div, but it's wrapped in a h1. And you can see it's same premise. It's taking this tag and it's making that the host element for our composed content. Super important if you're wanting to make it so it's easy to style or anything like that, where you want control over that parent element. So now we're moving on to passing data with model.bind. So this is a really important one. When you pass data into your dynamically composed element, you may want to pass in like a configuration object, some values to render. Maybe you have a user card or a widget, for example, and you want to pass in some data. We're going to use model.bind and the activate hook to achieve this. So inside of here, we're just going to clear out all of this stuff. We're going to composing with a model. Now we're going to put AU compose on here. Component equals user profile card. And model.bind equals user info. And then underneath, we're going to add in a button. Click.trigger equals change user. Now, we're going to create a user profile card component. And we're going to create a view model, user profile card.ts. That would just be a user, and we're going to add in an activate method, which of course is a model. And we're going to add a console log up the top here, user profile card activate called with model. And then we're going to save that on class as model. Now inside of here, we're going to we can also add in lifecycle hooks. So we're not going to add them all in, but we can have and we'll do attaching. And lastly, attached as well. So we've got our user profile card here. And now what we're going to do is just add in some HTML to this as well, just so we can show the data represented in a nicer way. So we'll do border px purple, padding 10 pixels, and then margin top 10 pixels. Now we're just going to add in some paragraph tags to render the provided values that come in. We're assigning to the user object, so role user.role and save that. So now we're going to import this component. And lastly, inside of my app, we need some data to actually render. So user info. This would usually be supplied by a server or something, but for today's example, we're just defining it all inline. And of course, we had a change user method where we want to illustrate the data changing. Perfect. So let's go into the browser and check. We can see we've got user profile, and that's Alice at the moment. And our data's been passed in. We've got user profile card element. And we can also see that our console log inside of the activate method is returning our object that's passed in here. And our lifecycle hooks are also being called. So we're going to clear that. Now we're going to change the user. So you can see that the data has changed inside of our component. It's called activate again because more data has come through. And now we've changed to ID2, Bob, and user. So if we refresh, we go back. So we see that we bind our user info object from the parent my app to the model property on the component right here on the AU compose element. Inside our profile card component, we have an activate method, which is a special lifecycle hook specific to composition and routing, and it gets called when the component is initially composed. And critically, it gets called again every time the object bound to model changes. So the new model value is passed as the argument, and this is perfect for reacting to data changes and updating the component state. And also notice how all the lifecycle hooks that we defined fire during the initial composition as well, just like if you were to use this element directly inside of your app. So now we're going to talk about passing properties directly. So while model.bind is great for passing a whole data object, what if you just want to pass individual properties like you normally would with custom elements? So good news is you can do that too. You don't have to use model.bind. If the component you're composing is a custom element with bindable properties, any bindings you declare directly on AU compose, other than the special ones like component, template, model, tag, etc., automatically pass through to the component's view model. So on this particular instance, we can delete these lifecycle hooks. We can delete activate as well. And we can delete all this stuff, but we are going to keep our user profile component. Now, let's just say we have the ability to change the title on there. We're going to go title.bind, and then we'll put just a string value in here that we bind, and my user card. Let's go bindable and then title. And we'll make that a default value of user profile. Then we're going to create another one of name we also need one for ID and bindable for role. Going to directly reference these now, so name, role, and then we also want title. So now these are bindable properties inside of our component here. We can pass these in, so now we can go name.bind Twain. Then we can go, what was the other one in there? It was role.bind admin. And crucially, we also want three. Name ID role, nothing to find in my app. Now, if we go into this component, we can see that it's rendering everything that we passed in. It's transferred those properties directly from the outer component that we defined. We defined ID, name, role, and also a title. And we can pass those bindings directly through on the AU Compose element. Because it's a custom element with those bindable properties, Aurelia automatically maps these through. It's just like writing my user card or whatever the component was called, user profile card, and then specifying those bindables directly on the element. So now that we've covered kind of passing in data and whatnot, now we're going to be talking about getting a reference to the component.ref. So sometimes you might need programmatic access to the instance of the view model that was just composed. And you can actually do that using component.ref. So we can keep this same example here and we can use component.ref equals my user profile card. And then we can type this as the instance of that particular class. And then inside of attached, we can console log this property. So if we look inside of here, we can see that we've actually got the view model instance as well as the magic controller property that gets added to composed view models in this instance for components. And we can see these values in here. So it's really good if you want to be able to access that, or say you had a particular method inside of this component you wanted to call, then that's a really good example of how you can access the actual underlying composed view model instance in there. So now we're just going to briefly talk about migrating from Aurelia 1. So if you're not migrating from Aurelia 1, you can skip over this, but it's just going to be a quick little about 30 seconds or so. So Aurelia 1 used view.bind and viewModel.bind. In Aurelia 2, these are now template.bind and component.bind, as you've seen. Passing a string to component now only works for custom element names. A string passed to template is always treated as a HTML template string. As we saw, bindings on AU Compose are passed through to the component, which is different from V1. And scope inheritance works differently, defaulting to the parent scope for non-custom element composition, unless you pass a scope behavior scoped property value. Aurelia does offer a compatibility package called compat v1, as you can see in the docs, which can temporarily enable the old view and view model bindings if you need smoother migration path. But the recommended way forward as Aurelia 2 is using template and component. So now we've got all that out of the way. That's the conclusion. That's the grand tour of dynamic composition with AU Compose and Aurelia 2. As you can see, it's very versatile, allows you to compose full custom elements by definition or name, render raw templates, pass in data using model.bind, the activate hook, transferred bindable properties, customize the host element, and even get a reference to the composed instance as well. Whew, that was a bit of a mouthful. So it's a fundamental tool for building dynamic, flexible, and powerful user interfaces. And it's not as intimidating or complex As you can see, the docs really do explain this quite well. So if nothing made sense in this video, please do head over to docs.aurelia.io, available from our website, and read through the documentation because it is very extensive and goes into details of working with these things a little bit more than what we did in this video, but hopefully this video served as a visual reference to help you understand dynamic composition if you didn't really understand it beforehand. So if you found this video useful, we'd appreciate a thumbs up and subscribing as well, because we're going to be making more of this Aurelia content on a regular basis, and we want to make it for people like you who have questions about how to work with Aurelia. So if you have any topics you'd like to see covered, please do let us know on our Discord or in the comments below. And we always take suggestions from the community, and we want this to be for you. So we want it to be a good little supplement to the official Aurelia documentation. So I'm going to end the video there, but if you made it to the end, I appreciate you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you.